What are the costs of presenteeism in the workforce? There have been a number of recent estimates of that. In the US, they show about double the cost of absenteeism. A Medibank survey done in Australia in 2000 actually assessed it as something around 4 times the cost of absenteeism. And the effects of influenza are rather unusual or surprising in some ways, because mild episodes of influenza or other respiratory illnesses can actually impair people's reaction times. By comparison, consumption of alcohol probably produces a lesser reduction in one of the major studies that was done back in 1998. And we see repeatedly in the literature these sort of estimates. This is a news article based on an insurance company which said that driving with a cold or the flu is equivalent to the effect of driving with a double whiskey under the belt. So it's probably quite important to your workplace. The potential for loss due to people being present can be even greater than being absent. What can we do about influenza in the workplace? Well, we can certainly encourage absenteeism rather than presenteeism. Now, that may be a little hard to do, but economically it may be much wiser than trying to encourage people to come to work. We do tend to have people encouraged to come to work with the flu and with serious colds by a lot of the advertising that we see on television these days. Take these cold and flu medications and soldier on. These are analgesics. They make you feel better. They don't reduce the infection, and they do encourage you to do the wrong things, unsafe behavior, working, exercising, socializing, and spreading infection and stressing your body. There are prescription antivirals available. They're fairly expensive, must be taken within the first 2 days of onset of infection, but they can certainly reduce the period of infection and the severity of the infection. They don't make you instantly feel better, so maybe you do have to take them with the cold and flu medications. You can encourage good workplace hygiene, reminder signs, covering your cough, disposing of tissues. And you can encourage people to wash their hands and use hand gels to stop them contaminating the surfaces that they're touching and spreading the infection to other people. Or you can vaccinate your workforce. So who should be vaccinated? Well, based on the Australian Immunisation Handbook, the 9th edition in 2008, the 10th edition is about to be published and it will be much the same. And they start off by saying anybody wishing to reduce their risk of becoming ill with influenza. So in effect, that's I guess, all people in the population who really don't want to be ill with flu during the year. But there are a whole lot of people who are at increased risk of severe complications, and those are listed here: older adults, people with underlying risk conditions, pregnant women, people in institutional environments. And people who may transmit influenza to high-risk individuals. If you're a carer for somebody who's looking after a high-risk person, or if you're in contact with somebody who's pregnant, for example, a good idea for people to be vaccinated. That bracket in the middle are entitled to free vaccine from the Australian government. Older Australians tend to avail themselves of that. A lot of the people with underlying risk conditions unfortunately don't, and we're not really sure why. They don't necessarily recognise it, or they don't get around to going to the doctor to have their flu shot. Now, there are a lot of questions I hear very frequently about influenza vaccines. How they're made and what's in them, why do we have to have them every year, do they cover all the strains, aren't there hundreds of viruses out there that you couldn't possibly protect against? Are they safe? Are they likely to cause influenza or other things? And are they effective? Will they really keep you healthy during the winter? Well, they're made by growing virus in embryonated chicken eggs. Currently all Australian vaccines, all the vaccines available in Australia are made in this way. It's very old technology, but it has been improved dramatically in terms of the cleanliness and the processing of the product that comes out of that. And hopefully we will move to producing vaccines under other conditions in fermenters in cell culture in the future. The virus, having been grown in the eggs, is concentrated, purified and activated using very, very sophisticated centrifuge technology. And then this virus, after being inactivated, is actually split, we call it. It's broken apart into little pieces. So there's the virus being broken. And on occasions, some companies actually take their vaccine a stage further and purify just those little bits of H and N on the surface, which are the pieces that the body responds to in producing immunity. They're essentially the same. There's no discernible difference in terms of the reactions to the vaccine between a split vaccine and a purified subunit vaccine as shown here. And what I didn't say there was that they're standardized, formulated, put into individual syringes and administered either by intramuscular or subcutaneous injection, that's into your arm, or one vaccine has a little tiny needle which is, goes just into the skin or just under the skin. So what's in the vaccines? Well, essentially, it's just bits of purified viruses, salts, sodium chloride, phosphates and the like that are there to suspend the virus, purified water, and some very small traces of detergents, non-toxic detergents, and maybe a trace of egg proteins. Why are we splitting the influenza vaccines? Well, it was found some years ago that even if you purified influenza virus to a very high level and inactivated it, it still tended to cause some flu-like symptoms on occasions, particularly in young children. And this is a study that was done many years ago showing if you take the temperature of people before you give them a dose of influenza vaccine, a whole influenza vaccine, and then measure it 24 hours later, almost everybody has got an elevation of temperature to some extent. If you actually break the virus up into little pieces, that goes away. So you get a much less reactive vaccine. In fact, it does make the current influenza vaccines very, very safe and very non-reactive. When we look at the production time for influenza vaccines, of course there's this lead time of getting the chooks to produce the eggs, but people anticipate that. So it really all starts from the time that the vaccine formulation decision is made, and that gives you a period of about 20 weeks before the vaccine is coming out the door. Now, that unfortunately is a period that at the moment with our current production we can't avoid. So there's a little bit of a delay compared with the surveillance that goes on. Why are the vaccines produced annually? Well, as I said earlier, these viruses are mutating all the time. A lot of effort's being put into longer-lasting vaccines that might attack other parts of the virus that don't change, and they may be getting a little closer at this stage. On the other hand, our antibody response to the inactivated flu vaccines does decline fairly quickly. It might be adequate beyond 12 months in healthy younger people if the strains don't change, but that's fairly rare. And the more antibody that we have, the more response that we have, the better our protection. Do they cover all the strains? Well, we've got this worldwide network of laboratories through the World Health Organization, surveillance looking at the 3 families of influenza virus that are circulating in the population and tracking the changes that go on in those viruses, the type A's, the 2 type A's, and the type B. And this is a program started in 1947 that's grown to now include 140 national centres, 5 major centres in the world, one of which is here in Melbourne. They're all collecting and analysing viruses. And the vaccine formulation is reviewed and updated, if necessary, twice a year, once for the Northern Hemisphere and once for the Southern Hemisphere.